Welcome to Reviving Faith, addressing church decline and embracing renewal. I'm Reverend Natalie Justice, and each week we'll sit down with pastors from across the United Methodist Connection to talk about the real challenges facing the church and the hope that keeps us moving forward. Together we'll explore what's behind church decline, what's working to re-engage and attract new members, and how churches can stay true to their faith while adapting to a challenging world. The challenges are big, but God is bigger. Let's dive in. We are delighted to welcome Reverend Rachel Billups. She's the co-author of a few books as well as the author of Be Bold, Finding Your Fears, and the author of An Unlikely Advent. We hope this conversation blesses you. Come join us. Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Natalie Justice. I'm the host, and I'm excited to have Reverend Rachel Billups from New Albany United Methodist in New Albany, Ohio. Rachel, it's good to have you with us today.
I am so excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in. The first question I've got is, what do you believe are the primary causes of church decline in the United States, and how do these challenges uniquely affect your congregation?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I don't think there's any exact answer to this. I've done a lot of reading, Barna Group and different organizations, Pew and Research, who talk about reasons for church decline. And I think there's a multitude of them. One of the things that I really do think about is just the nature of the changes in our culture. We recognize that young families are busier than ever. I happen to have 4 children that range from in college to second grade, and my husband and I both work, and our schedules are chock full, even though we have these funny little rules that our kids can only participate in one extracurricular activity at a time. But I find that young families in particular are just really busy. Their lives are full. And so, even looking at the church 25, 30, 40 years ago, family dynamics were a bit different than they are today. I do believe that people are increasingly suspicious of institutions, particularly religious institutions. People have had less than pleasant experiences, toxic Christianity, abuse in the church, hypocrisy at the highest levels. And now that we live in a society where information is at our fingertips and in our ears constantly, when things happen in churches, particularly, the megachurch world, we hear about it, all the scandals and all of those things. Have people been humany for the last 35 or 40 or 50 years? Of course they have, but we didn't hear about it all the time. And I think it's with that cocktail of interestingness, if you will, that we find ourselves in the church experiencing church decline. Now, true confession, I'm not in a place where we're declining. So and I think it's a couple of things. Let me be honest right off the bat. I happen to be a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. Columbus is the fastest growing city in the United States of America right now and projected to be for the next decade. It is way easier to be in an area that's growing and your church grow than it is to be in an area that's declining and your church grow, right? You're kind of like swimming along with everyone else. Now, also I recognize that just because your community is growing doesn't mean your church is automatically going to grow. In fact, you have to be really intentional with the work that you're doing to grow in any sort of numeric or spiritual way in the life of the church. So I think in our congregational case, we're like many communities where, everybody in our community is very different. We have diversity in all of its forms, including political diversity. And when you have diversity in all of its forms, including political diversity, I feel like we live in a season where people are drawn to homogeneity. I want to be with people that look like me and vote like I vote and eat the foods that I eat and who are quote unquote with me. And it's in those contexts that I find that, at least it seems, churches that are experiencing growth, it's because like people are kind of getting with like people. Now, my church, that's not the case. We happen to be attracting a diversity of people, but we're also intentional with that. We're the kind of congregation that says we make good neighbors, and we want to meet people. We want to help people meet Jesus where they are. And so, with some intentional practices, we're able to do what we say we want to do.
So thank you. So my next question is, in your experience, what strategies or practices have proven effective in re-engaging congregants and attracting new members? Let's change that a little bit. Let's say making new disciples, particularly the younger generation. So what kind of strategies or practices do you find have been effective?
Well, Natalie, I think it's really important that we're we hold a posture of possibility. That the posture that we come at this kind of stuff is no longer, we're the experts, we know how to do this, we have all these strategies and practices, because the truth of the matter is, I'm not sure that anybody has figured out what does it look like to be an effective disciple-making church in 2025. Can we just get real for a moment? I'm not sure that any one of us have this particularly figured out. So I do believe, and I love this, because I think this is an opportunity for us to move with the movement of the Holy Spirit, the power of the Holy Spirit. We've got to be experimenting a lot in this season. Now, I also realize that it's hard to experiment when you can't pay the bills and your church is declining and you're just trying to hold on to what you have. But the only way to grow is to live in this kind of open-handed way, like open our hands and say, okay, Lord, what worked before ain't working anymore. So how do I move into the future in such a way that's effective and fruitful and those kinds of things? So I think we have to do experiments. We have to prototype. We have to kind of figure out what works now in the season that we find ourselves in. And so in the congregation that I'm in, I'm always experimenting and kind of pushing against some of this is the way we've always done it. This is what we used to do kind of mentality. I'll give you just one super simple example. I came from a system when I was at Ginghamsburg Church. We preached as a preaching team. We had at one time, 3 campuses. And by the time we had 2 campuses and we had a kind of after COVID, an interesting Saturday night expression that was led by lay people, I had about 25 people on my teaching team. Now, not everybody preached at our largest campus, our Tip City campus, but there were people who preached at Tip City. There were folks who preached at Fort McKinley. Some preached at both. And then we had a group of lay people that we were training up. And so we had this whole system of preaching. And I don't want anybody listening to this podcast to puke, but what that meant was that I had to be 2 weeks in advance of crafting my sermon, because what would happen is the preacher who was preaching at Fort McKinley would take the Tip City campus pastor sermon and then make it their own. And the same thing would happen to the person on Saturday night. We'd go over all of those because we were trying to develop an entire team of people who had the gift of preaching and create these environments, be they places to preach or places to lead, that we were really shaping and discipling new leaders and new preachers. Well, I took that same concept and created a kind of a worship design team here. I happen to have a handful of retired pastors in my congregation, and I have an attitude that if you're a retired clergy person, you cannot set the bench in my congregation because I don't have a lot of staff. And so we continue to work in this kind of worship design team, and we have clergy and retired clergy and also laity that I'm ever developing into preachers and teachers, because I want my congregation to recognize that no one person has the monopoly on the Holy Spirit. That actually, when we hear different people kind of wrestling with the word, wrestling with the Bible, that we have kind of a diverse experience of the Bible. Like what I'm going to bring as a 44-year-old mother of four, who happens to be a white woman, right, is not going to be what Pastor Mike Pratt brings as a 75-year-old who had a former career in the juvenile prison system before becoming a pastor. So I just really want people to kind of experience all these pieces and parts. And so I'm kind of obsessing over kind of baking that diversity within even our preaching team. I think all of these experimentations that we're doing have to be deeply collaborative. And I'm not sure that we're all used to collaboration. If I'm really honest, I cut my teeth on something called the church growth movement. And in the church growth movement, there was kind of this person who was the Moses on the mountain that brought everything to the people. Well, now I don't know that we really need Moses on the mountain. I feel like we're in a season where we've got to be more Joshua among the people. And how are we forming teams around ourselves that really are empowered to do ministry within our local context? Now, it's going to look different in New Albany, Ohio, than it's going to look in anywhere else in the country. And so I think about things like I have this building, and I imagine many of the listeners, they have buildings. And when I look at my building, we have a preschool in our building. We have things like blood drives in our building. We have AA 3 nights a week in our building. We have the symphony chorus that practices in our building. We have our choir practice and our band practice and all of our meeting groups and all those kinds of things. So in the evening, our building is hopping. It's actually pretty difficult to find a time to come and be in a space in our building in the evening, but not during the day. We have the preschool, and that's about it. Like I said, a few exceptions. And I began dreaming of the possibility, what if we could maximize our space for the sake of the kingdom and as an alternative form of like economic stability for the future? And so we've been exploring all kinds of possibilities. Nonprofits that need space, because here in New Albany, Ohio, space is at a premium and space is very expensive. So how could we be a good neighbor to those nonprofits in our community? But also we have a food pantry in our community that we've been in conversations with about. We have 9,000 square feet of unfinished space, a new sanctuary with 9,000 square feet of unfinished space underneath. It's not really a basement. It's kind of a walkout, beautiful space. And so how can we partner in our community in such a way that we're in alignment with the vision that God has for our church? Like, we want to be good neighbors. So not coming out of alignment with that, but also maximize the resource. One of the resources we have is the building. So I think we got to reimagine, everything. We've got to reimagine everything and have the courage to take risks, not crazy risks that just blow everything up and, but take risks that really do give us the energy, the enthusiasm to imagine new pieces and parts. Now, one of the things that I've done recently, this is a little risky for me, even in New Albany, Ohio, I just had a sermon series that was called Losing My Religion. And preached a sermon series. I didn't preach it alone. April Casperson, who works with MTSO, the Methodist Theological School in Ohio, was one of my preachers. She preached on how to be an anti-racist. And then Dan Jackson, who's one of the retired clergy persons in my congregation, he came from the Florida Annual Conference and worked a lot in new church starts and fresh expressions and those kinds of things and leadership development. He's an absolute gift. He preached on how to use the Bible as a tool, not a weapon. But I preached on Christian nationalism, LGBTQ plus inclusion, and egalitarianism versus complementarianism. Real light stuff.
Exactly.
and frankly, in Black History Month and, February and a little bit of March. And so right after the inauguration, but this is what I just felt led to do. And what was amazing, Natalie, is that it attracted a lot of young people. because a lot of young people are really curious about what does the church have to say about what's happening in the world we find ourselves in. Now, it doesn't mean like I wasn't out to please everybody. I wasn't out to blow anybody up. It doesn't mean I didn't get myself in trouble on occasion with some of the things that I was saying right out loud. But it does mean that we're creating spaces where people can bring their questions, where people can bring their concerns, when they can wrestle with faith and politics and the life that we find ourselves in. And so, how do we create that space in our churches without blowing our churches completely up? And so, I think pastors have to have the courage to have those, what I would call hard conversations. In that series, we had 47 first-time visitors. 47 first-time visitors in that series because people were just, and many people have stayed because they're like, hey, if you're willing to have conversations around these things, this is the kind of church that I want to be a part of.
Well, it goes with that whole the big tent. With the Methodists and having that safe space to come and ask questions. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I think that piece is really important. I also just want to say the other thing that we have to do is we have to create systems and processes and what I would call easy on-ramps for people. So they're coming into the church, easy on-ramps for people to get connected in relationship and responsibility. People want to know that they have a place to belong, and they really want to make a difference. They want to have some kind of meaning that they can engage in. And what I found is that in order to grow as a congregation, I've got to get out of the way. I got to let go of some stuff that I want to do. Like I can't teach every Bible study, and I can't preach every sermon, and I can't be at the center of every decision that's being made. I've got to create a system in which people can be empowered to live out of their call and the purpose that they have in their life. And there are times I got to be honest that, someone will commend one of my, retired clergy for doing such a great job because they do a great job. They do a great job of preaching it. And then I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, what about me? Like my ego gets there. Or someone decides they want to start a new ministry and I have nothing to do with it. Well, wait a second. Can they do that? Yes, they can do that, but you see what I'm saying? So often I feel like leaders, clergy persons, we become the gatekeepers of ministry.
Yeah.
And so we are in a season where if you're going to experiment, if you're going to prototype, if you're going to empower, you got to be open-handed. And you've got to let go of some things that you may want to, dare I say, control in the life of the church for the sake of the future of the church. One more thing that I think is really important, Matt Rawl and I have been doing a lot of work with the Hub for Innovation and being very intentional with listening to the voices of the next generation. Because I know even though like my skin is so fabulous, I am a middle-aged clergy person, right? Like I'm a middle-aged clergy person. And I think it's so important for us to recognize that there are generations of clergy people that are younger than we are. And so how are we listening to the voices of younger generations and how they experience the world? Because let me say, my experience is not their experience. So, right. And then how do their voices then shape how we are shifting and changing and moving into the future of the church? So I think it's so important for us to be listening well to new generations of clergy persons.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I completely agree with you. My last question with you is, how can churches balance staying true to their theological foundations while adapting to the changing cultural landscapes to remain relevant and impactful? I mean, you touched on that some, but that's a challenge for a lot of churches, is to get out of that mindset of this is always how we've done it.
Yeah. So I think part of it, the way I want to answer this question is we got to understand who we are really. Who are really, not just who we say we are, not just like who like this talking head or this talking head thinks we should be, not our favorite news source of choice, but who are we really? I think I believe that churches really need to operate out of this particular identity. Our mission statement in the United Methodist Church is we make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Great. What does that mean in your context? What does that mean in Tennessee? What does that mean in Ohio? What does that mean in a rural place? What does that mean in an urban place? What does that mean in the particular unique location that God has planted you? And when you get a real sense of this is who we are, this is what we're called to do, this is the kind of the cultural identity that we have in this place, then I think you truly operate out of that. We're not going to do this, but we are going to do this. And I think if people and churches operated out of a kind of their core identity more than just kind of reacting to certain pieces and parts of our culture, I think that would be a great start.
Mm-hmm.
I also believe it's important that churches learn how to navigate the art of conflict. We suck at conflict. Can I say that?
Oh, amen. Yeah.
We suck at conflict. And so I've been pretty obsessed over the last 4, 5, 6 years of teaching my folk, shepherding my folk in a process that we call like the art of making hard or engaging in hard conversations. Now, I didn't come up with this one. Actually, a youth group out of National Community Church came up with this practice. And we talk about asking anything, listening well, freely disagreeing, and loving regardless. Ask anything, listen well, freely disagree, love regardless. And then we create environments where people can do just that. I'll give you an example. We have these things that we call listen and learns. And we have people come in and they tell their story, and then people can ask questions. Our latest listen and learn was called Witness to History, Growing Up Black in the Civil Rights Movement. We had two persons, Alexine Gales, who is the niece of Ralph Abernathy. Ralph Abernathy was the right-hand man to MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. And then her cousin, Juanita Thomas, was actually a cousin of Rosa Parks. Wow. And so we had these two women in their 80s, 80 and 81, who lived this history and shared their stories. And they were really good, honest. They grew up in pretty much a middle class, maybe even upper middle class Black family, and talked about what they didn't experience and what they did experience. And people asked really poignant questions, and they gave really poignant answers. And so you create this environment where people can talk about the racism that still exists in the United States of America today. I mean, it's just really this beautiful kind of practice that we've been able to engage in. And I think when you create those safe environments, you know, people are able to ask questions that they're not always, what is the word that I want to give? They're not always politically correct. And they'll say, like, look, I'm asking this question humbly, and I know I'm going to sound as ignorant as all get out, but let me ask it, and then you can help me understand maybe even why my question is the wrong question to ask. So, so how do you create these environments where people really do feel like they're safe to be their full, authentic selves and come with a variety of questions? I also want to say, Natalie, I think a lot of why churches are struggling to move forward, are struggling to grow forward, is because of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what if I don't do it right, fear if I get it wrong, fear if I fail, fear that I'm not enough, all of it. And we've got to operate forward and still be afraid. We got to do it scared. We got to say, you know what? Fear is a constant companion. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm an extrovert, but even as an extrovert, I can go into a room of people, like kind of my picture of hell sometimes is going to a networking event where I just don't really know anybody and no one knows who I am. And then I have to like make all this small talk. And when people find out I'm a pastor, they're like, oh, how does that even work? Or they walk away because they're like, I'm not really interested in talking to you. You see what I'm saying? And there's all this fear and anxiety that like is rushing through your body. How can we say, I'm a beloved child of the living God. I'm worthy to be in this room. All of these folks are beloved children of the living God too. And all I'm trying to do is make a human connection to a human connection. And so, and how do we look at the people outside of our church building, not as like, oh, those pesky neighbors, but no, those incredible, beloved of children, God neighbors.
Mhm.
Every single stranger is a friend in waiting. So how do we do that? Now, every once in a while, are you going to encounter a grumpy human being? Yeah, you're going to encounter a grumpy human being. But what I've discovered is, man, you lean in long enough. You lean in long enough, and even the grumpiest of human beings are going to be like, look, what's your deal?
Mhm.
Because no one's talked to me in the last 3 months of my life, and yet you're still here.
Mm.
So do you really want to hear what I have to say? Yes, I really want to hear what you have to say. And then when you hear what they have to say, you can't take it personal
Mhm.
because they're going to unload 35 years of church hurt and recognize like you're just there to hold space, to hear the way in which sometimes the institution has done some people wrong. But in that holding space, you become just beautiful grace, a space of grace for people. So I know I'm rattling on and on and on about all kinds of things, but yeah, be present, be authentic, be yourself, be a space where people can come just as they are. And again, every context, that's going to be a little different. But even a tiny little church in the most rural place. Oh my gosh, I grew up in a very small church in a very rural place. And you know what they were great at? Gathering for meals.
Mm.
Being there when someone was sick or had been through a tragedy. Creating community in the midst of all of those things we still need desperately. So just be who you are, but extend it beyond the people that you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. One more quick question to throw out there. People who are listening to this probably are discouraged, and you've given so much
Yeah.
encouragement through your all of it. Trust me, you have. If there was one more thing, one more word of encouragement you could share with laity or clergy who are listening to this and thinking, man, I want to see people come to Jesus. I want to see renewal. I want to see revival. What would that be?
I would say revival starts with you,
Mm.
So tell me what your prayer life is like.
Mm.
Tell me the last time you had a holy encounter with Jesus. Let's talk about the last awakening that you've experienced. What is the Holy Spirit doing in your life? What do you see in your community?
Mm.
And so I think it's really easy for us to be like, well, these people,
Mhm.
let's start with this person. And I want to say, like, when you are full of the Holy Spirit, when you and it's not, I don't want people to think I'm talking about privatized religion, because I think, it's not just about me and Jesus, it's about me and Jesus and everybody else. But when you're full of the Holy Spirit and you enter a room, you change the atmosphere.
Mhm.
You change the atmosphere. And I happen to believe that the power of the Holy Spirit, the Spirit alive and well in you, is contagious. And then that starts like working on another person, another person, another person. I don't think we have to do anything big. What's that next small thing that God is asking you to do? What's that next bold move that you're supposed to make? Is it texting someone? Is it picking up the phone? Is it inviting your neighbor over to have a Bible study, just the two of you in your house? Is it meeting all of these young moms at a coffee shop? Is it asking the guys to go for wings on Tuesday nights and talk about like, hey, what is it that we're really facing? I mean, it doesn't have to be like systematic 4-point plan, what is that next bold move that God's asking you to make it?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. For those who are watching, thank you for joining us, and tune in for our next episode next week. Thank you again, Rachel, for your encouragement, words of wisdom, and it was a blessing to talk to you as always.
Thank you, Natalie.